to understand what's going on with it. Did it just stop sharing? Actually, no, I think it still is. I lost the little green box that's on the screen usually when it is.
No, you're
No
good.
worries. All right, so quite simply, these three events right here occur whenever a user deposits into the M token in order to be able to mint them. Actually, let me take a step back and actually show you a bit more about how the actual ecosystem itself works. Before I get into the M tokens, probably makes more sense to go through more of an abstract run through of it. So taking a step back, DMM is all about providing stable interest to on-chain deposits. Just like any other on-chain money market, the difference is just how we generate that interest. So if you guys are familiar with Compound at all, from a technical perspective, it's essentially the same thing, except instead of on-chain borrowers fueling the interest payments, it's instead off-chain contractual engagements that get sent on-chain in the form of interest deposits. With that, I'm sure you guys have all heard about with our partnership with Chainlink, how we're backing it with real-world income-generating assets that are essentially pooled. The pools are then represented in the form of the interest coming into the contracts, depending on whichever token it is we're looking at. So in this case, we have DAI, USDC, USDT, and ETH. And the way the system actually works is people deposit the underlying tokens, and you'll hear me say the words underlying and M token quite a bit. They deposit underlying tokens, that being the DAI, USDC, USDT, or ETH, into the contracts. And then with that, behind the scenes, the administrators of the protocol, which at this point is the DAO, is able to actually withdraw those underlying funds from the M tokens and then convert them into fiat to then allocate them to a real-world asset. And in case you guys had any questions about the transparency into that, we do have an asset explorer that allows people to see every individual asset that backs the ecosystem that plays into the overall health and collateralization of it. That data is pulled from a server that Chainlink also gets access to, and then sanitizes with pricing data in order to be able to upload that pricing data independently of us and in a trust minimized manner. So those assets that we then acquire also pay out interest, which is returned to the ecosystem, and that's sent into the ecosystem in the form of an on-chain deposit into the M tokens, so that people are able to, in step 4, swap those M tokens, which we call redeeming, back to the underlying tokens for the original plus the interest, or if they want to, they can just do the interest or some mix and match of both. So with that, these M tokens really just represent a tokenized balance representation of whatever you have deposited in the ecosystem from an underlying perspective. And it's essentially a derivative of what you deposited them with that. The M tokens themselves are, of course, ERC20 compliant. They do have support for delegation through a relayer, so that a relayer can actually broadcast transactions on the user's behalf, so they don't have to pay gas fees, which is why we have that first tagline there, of no more gas fees. And then lastly, they have stable growth attributed to them, meaning the underlying exchange rate from M token to underlying is constantly going up. And the way that we're actually able to accomplish what we have with our M tokens, in that they're freely transferable, you can always re-up and otherwise redeem or mint any quantity at any time within a certain upper or lower bound, is because of this thing that we call an underlying exchange rate that is constantly going up by whatever the interest rate is. And we'll see that when we actually take a look at the smart contract definition. And then lastly, the governance for the token itself is done in the form of a DAO. That's using our DMG governance token, which is a fork of Compound's comp token with a couple minor features added into it. So it supports native delegation. It keeps track of voting weight using essentially what we call a ballot balance. And it always snapshots whatever your balance is at the end of a block after a transfer occurs, which allows us from a managerial perspective prevent against things like flash loan attacks, whereby someone executes a flash loan in order to be able to acquire a lot of DMG and then returns it in the same block just to be able to vote with a very large weight. If you're curious, there is definitely some more information in the white paper, which is, from an engineering perspective, more of like a reader's digest. If you go to the architecture section, you can see over here a bit more of how it works from a design perspective. And then there's also some basic information from a coding perspective as well. This smart contract architecture diagram is a bit out of date now at this point, just because the organization's multi-signature wallet doesn't strictly control the ecosystem anymore, rather the DAO does. So this would need to get updated, but otherwise though, everything else from a non-ownership perspective still stands. So with that, I'm gonna go back over to the coding side of things, be able to walk through this again. For those of you who are looking to be able to parse through events that occur whenever an action occurs on chain, the two main ones for mTokens would definitely be your minting and redeeming. In this case, the amount, which is not documented that well, the amount that gets emitted from this event is the amount of mTokens that is minted for the mint function, or I'm sorry, for the mint event. And then for the redemption one, I'm fairly certain that it is, yes, it's still the amount of mTokens that are redeemed at redemption when you want to convert it back to the underlying asset. So with that, the protocol itself is naturally open for anyone to be able to work with, manipulate, integrate with, or anything far and wide in between. So there's a lot of things that could be built on top of it from a statistics perspective or an analytical perspective. Something we have not explored at all yet is setting up any Dune analytics pages for the mToken environment for minting and redemptions that occur to and from. But there's a lot of different things that can be done with regards to statistics on distributions of the sizes of people who are minting and redeeming, the frequency, which assets are more popular, et cetera, et cetera. So with that, if you're looking to get a better understanding of how the mToken's value itself accrues and changes over time, your best thing would be to look at, excuse me, actually, I don't know why I'm looking at this. If you're looking at the interface, this is actually what's documented. Excuse me. Is this exchange rate over here. So these two functions over here up top, exchange rate last updated for the timestamp and block number, are largely not going to be useful from a value derivation perspective because that gets indexed whenever someone mints or redeems. So if people don't mint or redeem too often, then these values can go out of date very quickly. Rather, the thing that's definitely more useful would be this current exchange rate, which always has 18 decimals, or rather it's represented as one way, just like how Ethereum is represented with 18 decimals to it. And it essentially represents an exchange rate from underlying to, from mToken to underlying. And then if you invert that by taking the number and dividing 1 by that number, then you can essentially have the exchange rate from underlying token to mToken then. So just as an example then, we can walk this over to Etherscan to see what the actual value is right now and also how it changes. So I'm going to go over to the USDC contract, go over here and hit read. You can see the current exchange rate right here is this 1.033 number, which if I divide by 1e to the 18, you can see it's 1.033. And this number updates every block that gets mined. And also the big thing to keep in mind is, as I mentioned before, this number has 18 decimal places to it. Even though USDC has 6 and MUSDC has 6 decimals, this number always has 18 to it, regardless of what the decimal, regardless of the decimal count of the underlying asset with which it is tied to. And I'm sure from the time that I just talked until now, another block has been mined. So if I refresh the page, or maybe not, if we refresh the page basically after 15, 30 seconds or so, you should see that the exchange rate went up, and sure enough, it did now. This was the previous number up here that it was beforehand, and now it's currently outdated again because a new block was mined and it was indexed behind the scenes then to essentially go up. That is basically everything from an M token perspective when it comes to value accrual, how minting and redeeming occurs. Otherwise, it has the same standard functions that ERC20s have with transferring, checking the total supply, approving and allowances, etc. Does anyone have any questions so far with M tokens? I didn't see any hand waves or any raised hands so far, but figured this might be a natural stopping point for a moment in case anyone wants to chat for a second or bounce any ideas.
There's a Q&A feature there. There's a couple questions popping into there.
Oh, I was not looking for that. Yes, Tim Draper is actually invested for one. That's easy. So the difference between the M token and the DMG token is that M tokens are wrappers around underlying assets. For example, DAI, USDC, USDT, etc. And then on the other hand, the DMG token is its own new token. It's not a derivative. It doesn't wrap around anything else. It's strictly used for governance right now of the protocol, whereby the number of tokens that you hold corresponds to the amount, the weight that you have in your vote whenever proposals are created to be voted on. And then with that, with this last question, I'm curious if this can be used to represent unique assets. This can't be used to represent unique assets at the moment because these tokens are fungible, meaning whenever someone mints or redeems, they're freely transferable and they are completely indistinguishable from any other token that gets otherwise freely transferred. And the reason why they're able to remain non-fungible is because of this underlying exchange rate thing that I just spent a good amount of time talking about. The exchange rate allows us to standardize any deposit or withdrawal to and from the ecosystem to always be in like terms across the entire ecosystem as a whole. All right. All right, so how I want to start to build on top of this, that's a really good question. Definitely, if you have any questions with more specific things or general things like this, feel free to take them to the DMM support Discord in the Discord channel for Chainlink. That's definitely a good place to continue conversing on top of this. But as far as like what would be a good place to continue to build, I would start first with the idea of what it is you might have in mind that you might want to build with this. Obviously, it might not be the best thing to build for a hackathon, but for example, Draper Gore and Holm, one of the venture studios that invested in us, is actually building a consumer application that that basically is an alternative banking services application, whereby people deposit or wire money into the application, and behind the scenes it actually gets converted into crypto, and then that crypto actually purchases M tokens or swaps for M tokens in order to accrue interest for the end consumer. Essentially, what this allows developers and other ecosystem participants to do is build abstract things on top of our ecosystem that basically like make the entire process of getting access to interest easier and more seamless than what could have been done beforehand. And so with that, like that's obviously a more comprehensive thing to do, build an entire consumer application, of course, and build a mobile app for it. But at its simplest, the simplest thing you can do with M tokens, if you wanted to have some functionality with this actual minting and redeeming I'm showing, you could just make another interface for it that allows people to mint and redeem with it. And then we've also seen some very interesting things get built on top of Compound, and I hate to just keep talking about Compound, but it does make sense from a perspective of how the protocols are engineered, that they're similar, and that there's a lot of protocols that are built around it in the sense that they either offer interest through it or they offer what I call flash interest to and from some other operation. So there's other protocols that have been built around in DeFi, around like trading, for example. Token sets are one of them, like set protocol. And set protocol, for example, allows people to trade different sets of tokens, hence where the name comes from, basically using different strategies in a decentralized manner. And while you're holding on to a token, for example, DAI or USDC to maintain some position, what they actually do instead is they'll diversify that DAI or USDC into interest-bearing compound or interest-bearing DMM, so that their strategies are not just holding on to USDC to maintain some position, they're also accruing interest in USDC or DAI while they're also maintaining that position for a week, 2 weeks, a month at a time. The idea is that this protocol is very flexible from the perspective that you can go to and from tokens very easily and very seamlessly. It's just one smart contract call away. And this allows you to build very unique use cases on top of it, because there isn't a large amount of friction when moving from one asset to another. The documentation, we're not 100% sure yet, to be honest, because we're still working heavily on protocol development, which could deprecate certain things. And we don't want to necessarily work on documentation and then release a new feature that would force us to otherwise rewrite it. But with that being said, it is a priority for us, and we do want to have some pretty robust documentation up sometime this upcoming quarter. Cool. So with that, I think that what I'm going to do next is show off a bit more when it comes to the ecosystem and how things can get built on top of it. So here, for example, we have this governor beta contract, which allows individuals to vote and otherwise participate in our ecosystem if they are holding DMG, our governance token. So I'm going to be switching topics to talk more about the governance side of things, which in my opinion, there might be some more flexibility for people that are looking to build things, especially that are more analytically based or not focused on building things that just allow you to generate interest. This could be another very viable avenue. The governor beta inherits from the governor alpha contract, and the governor beta contract, just as a heads up, is not deployed onto mainnet yet, but should be sometime within the next 2 weeks or so. You don't necessarily need to build something for this hackathon that is on mainnet. You could build something that works on any of the Ethereum test networks or a local one, so long as it integrates into our ecosystem. And later on, we might actually take it further and deploy it for you if you would like to, and we can run it live if you build on the test network instead of the main one. But with that, you can see that there's a function over here called cast vote, and it essentially allows you to vote on a proposal whether or not you support it. And you can see it calls this inner one with a voter. The voter is derived to be message.sender, the person that's actually casting the vote. And as you can see, it does some logic that essentially allows you to say whether or not you support the proposal or not, quite simply. But with that, we thought that this was quite restrictive, because the only way for you to be able to vote was through you interacting with the contract directly. That would be the exact wallet that you have holding DMG. Or the other option would be if someone votes through native delegation, which is this function over here, cast vote by signature. It allows you to vote by actually signing a signature offline and having someone else broadcast on your behalf. But we wanted to go somewhere in the middle of it. So with governor beta, there's actually a function now that allows individuals to cast a vote using a contract, so long as you as a user have signed off on using that contract. And we call this a trusted operator. And so as long as the contract that is voting on your behalf is either a trusted operator or a global one, a trusted operator has to be set on a per user basis, and the global one is set on a global basis by the owners of the contract, as you can see over here. And what this will allow you to do is otherwise inject middleware before the vote actually occurs to do something. So for example, on the governance side of things for the DMM Foundation and for the DMM ecosystem, what we're looking to do is use this feature in order to introduce voting rewards, which could be an interesting concept to encourage people to participate more widely in voting. With that, we think that there's a lot of other things that can get built on top of this as well using this feature. For example, we're speaking to the meme project that's building a lot of non-fungible tokens or NFTs or collectibles essentially for different purposes. And what you could do is you could have people vote through your proxy contract, and if you vote before a certain date, you can give them a collectible, for example, that shows that they are an early participant in the ecosystem for voting. And that could be like a badge of honor or like a little trophy or otherwise just a collectible that is essentially a bragging right for that individual that was able to vote and use the contract beforehand. We think that there's a lot of interesting things that can get built out using this feature, let alone the fact that the Governor Alpha contract also has its own set of events that get emitted whenever a proposal gets introduced, or here we go, whenever a proposal gets introduced or a vote is casted. And then the next major piece of the ecosystem I wanted to take a look at is burning, and this is going to be more data driven than actually building an application that would actually, I guess, interact with this. And what this looks like, okay, yeah, so the event is over here. But essentially what this is for is the interest that gets generated by the ecosystem, which, to take a step back, we'll go back to, excuse me, back over here. Because the ecosystem itself is always over collateralized, it's running at a surplus in the respect that the interest that it generates exceeds the interest that it is paying out to the end user, which allows the DAO to be a revenue-seeking entity that will run in a surplus pretty much always, as long as it's being run, managed and maintained properly. So with that, we actually just introduced our first voting proposal for taking the excess proceeds that have been generated so far and actually burning them, whereby we take the USDC that's been earned, we buy DMG with it, and then we burn the DMG. And that's actually what this contract is for then, that I was just taking a look at with you guys. So you can see the function over here, burn DMG, gets called. It takes the funds from message.sender of type token and of the amount, and it burns it using a Uniswap by placing a trade onto Uniswap, whereby it buys DMG with token and then takes the bought DMG and burns it, as we could see over here. It emits an event then, which basically tracks who was the burner and then what the burn amount was. And you also might notice that in the DMG token itself, it doesn't have a burn event either. I forgot about that. Whenever a burn event occurs, it does a transfer from the 0 address, as you can see over here. The source, or rather, I'm sorry, the source would be the address, and then the destination would be the 0 address, excuse me. And so that's one way to track burns then as well. But this contract we will be using for the time being for executing trades against Uniswap. But to track burning on a more fine-tuned basis that will never get missed, you want to basically track transfers that go to the 0 address then. The actual, as you can see over here, even though there's a require statement that says that we can't transfer to the 0 address, there is a burn function, as you can see over here, that allows a transfer to occur to the 0 address this way. All right, moving right along then. And then as Patrick and I were just talking at the start of the, at the start of this earlier, we're in the process of releasing yield farming, which comes with its own suite of contracts. And the way that yield farming works is it allows people to take their mTokens that they own, as well as their underlying tokens. So in this case, I'll use the example of USDC and MUSDC, and essentially deposit them into a Uniswap pool, which in itself spits out a token. And then we take that token and we lock it in our contract for yield farming. And what that allows you to do is earn interest in the form of DMG for you taking your tokens and adding liquidity to these pools, which essentially serve our ecosystem. With that, they come with their own set of functions and interfaces, as you can see in the IDMG yield farming v1 contract. A lot of this is geared towards administration, as we can see from most of this, but these functions over here are all user-driven. And that happens on a per user basis, whereas the ones above here are administrative ones. So with that, you can see what happens whenever a user begins the farming process. They deposit some token, which could be the liquidity provision token for the MUSDC and USDC pool, as well as the amount that they deposit. And then when they finish farming, it'll tell you how much they withdraw and then how much DMG they earned for doing so. Right now we have our own interface for farming, which is going to be tied to our governance dashboard, which in case any of you have not seen it yet, this is what the dashboard itself looks like. And it'll have and we'll basically be unlocking the farm tab on there for people to be able to trade, essentially. Not trade rather, but I'll take their tokens and deposit them into the ecosystem to participate in the program. So yeah, that's a very good question. The yield farming contracts as of right now are not audited. However, we do have a number of comprehensive tests written against them that allow us to test it for sanity's sake, whether or not it works properly. And to also be clear, the way that our yield farming works in comparison with other protocols, it's a closed loop circuit in that once you deposit the tokens into our platform, the only individual that can pull them out is you or an authorized individual that you authorize. And so with that, there isn't any counterparty risk that can sometimes be associated or attributed with other yield farming designs. And so with that, our design for it is much simpler in comparison. So we do limit the scope of risk for it, but correct, it is not audited though. So if there's any nervousness in interacting with the suite of contracts that has not been audited, you might have a better time working with it from the perspective of doing some kind of analytical hack with it instead of actually doing any kind of rights to the contract instead. Any other questions with yield farming? All right. Otherwise, I think that's most of like the high level stuff I wanted to run through for this presentation then, as far as different software that's finished right now and stuff that can be worked on. Right now, like a lot of our protocol exists in a consumable format on chain, but as a couple of people had mentioned, there isn't robust documentation yet. So those people that do want to work with our contracts, it would not be for the faint of heart necessarily. But with that, I'm very excited to work with you guys on any potential integrations or different things you guys want to be looking to work on. Happy to bounce ideas off one another back and forth, and otherwise happy to be working with the Chainlink team on the hackathon. It's been a pleasure working with the team so far, and we're looking forward to working on other things that are like this.
Cool. So it looks like there aren't any more questions here then.
Either I had the best presentation ever and no one has any more questions, or
You did a pretty phenomenal presentation here, though. So, oh, looks like there's one more. Thank
oh.
you. Okay, cool.
You're welcome.
Oh, okay. Maybe that one.
Yeah, there is a version of the contracts deployed on I think it's Rinkeby. On Ropsten it's deployed, but you can deploy it yourself. It might be a little bit of a pain to do, but it is deployable onto Ropsten. We do have scripts for it, but sometimes it can be buggy, and that sometimes the network will just time out or otherwise might just sever a connection midway through a deployment, which is quite aggravating.
Community insurance.
Insurance pool. So a community insurance pool, what are you looking to insure? Or are you looking to take funds that might be otherwise sitting somewhere to earn interest on it passively while the funds are sitting there in an insurance pool? And also, Brandon, if you have any desire um, to speak instead of just typing out questions, we can always just, I guess, promote him to talk, right?
Yeah.
All right, Brandon, you're muted right now, but in case you want to talk instead of typing things out, you're more than welcome to.
Hi, can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Okay,
Welcome.
cool. Let me just fix my audio real quick. Okay. Um, yeah, so I guess what I'm trying to do is have a pool of funds that are contributed to by individuals in the community and can only be used for qualified purposes. Like that's kind of the generic way of thinking about it. And specifically, we're doing it for health insurance, but I'm trying to keep the idea kind of general for the hackathon.
Got it. Yeah, it seems like the permissioning aspect of who's able to deposit or withdraw is more so a logic piece on your end, and it's not
Yep.
something that we would be concerned with.
Okay.
But the ability to deposit or withdraw into the ecosystem on a whim, and not having to worry about any permissioning or authorization issues, definitely make things or should make things easier on your part. You should have, I guess, more complications surrounding that logic on your
Yep.
end than on
That makes
ours.
sense. But I could have at least like if there was an admin person for the pool, because I also am thinking multiple contracts for like different pools, because I want it to be sort of a small thing that even if like 10 people were wanted to set up a pool together, they could. But there'd be one trusted person, and so maybe that person could have a stake in this sort of token, and then control the funds and put them all in stable coins. Because I also it basically might solve the problem of having to worry about so many different stable coins in one insurance fund and keeping it kind of standardized.
Hmm. Yeah, but luckily there's so many things you can integrate with that allow you to freely swap between tokens to standardize
True.
them. So you can, so if you're collecting USDC, DAI, PAX, USDT, etc., you can use Uniswap or any other automated token exchange uh, for freely converting them into your stable coin of choice. And then provided that that stable coin is supported by the DMM ecosystem, you can then deposit it and then to earn interest then. And then when
Okay,
someone's
gotcha.
ready to withdraw, you can always convert back to their original asset if you'd like to, or you can just say, hey, no, we're working with DAI or we're working with USDC, and that's what you're stuck with on the withdrawals. It's up to you.
Okay, that makes sense because I'm thinking like then I could put all the funds into a market like yours, even if it was just all in one stable coin that I swapped to, and then that way they could earn interest throughout the year and even past that because the pool is not going to just go away, but then they keep paying into it like every year, and so I want it to like grow as much as
Yeah, it allows
possible.
it to kind of remain perpetual in that way then.
Yeah, so I guess that answers my question. I have a lot more research to do still, but we'll see. Sounds useful. Thank you.
Awesome. My pleasure. And thanks for the great questions. And then someone else asked about the Chainlink oracles. So the Chainlink oracles exist in the protocol package over here. You can see, So there's this one function, this one contract for off-chain assets valuator, which essentially is the entity responsible for getting the Chainlink data. Um, right now, the jobs for it are submitted by an authorized person on the DMM side of things, whether it's the DAO or the foundation's multi-sig, etc. And upon submitting that request on chain, one of the Chainlink oracles will then perform, or a couple of the Chainlink oracles will then perform the job redundantly for us. It's fairly simple. The jobs already exist. Um, I would love to be able to put a bounty or give a specific challenge surrounding more Chainlink jobs that could get built for the Oracle network to perform for us. However, that's going to be done more so by the core team because there's some strict business requirements that will come out of it that we didn't think would work well fitting into a hackathon environment, unfortunately. So stay tuned for that. If you're an Oracle operator, you'll definitely be getting some DMM jobs in the future. However, we're just not going to be sponsoring any specific ones right now. If you have any specific ideas for things that you would like to build as a Chainlink compatible job, definitely let me know. That doesn't mean that you can't build one. It just means that we don't have a specific idea in mind for one that we're looking to have accomplished by the hackathon participants.
So something that would be interesting too, just to kind of jump in here, you could have a job get kicked off by anything, that's happening in the real world, right? Like maybe you want to do something with an M token based off of the weather, right? Or based off of what time it is, or based off of whatever. Those are all use cases for using a Chainlink Oracle and combined with DMM. So you can get more creative and kind of build stuff yourself. So really the sky's kind of the limit here.
Definitely agree with you on that, especially when you combine these with other contracts and automated systems. There could really be anything that comes into play when it comes to the transference movement, minting, redemption of these tokens, and then how they can freely interact with the ecosystem. You could even do probably very simple things like just cron jobs with Chainlink. Like if you wanted to, for example, let's say you deposited it in, and let's say nice easy number about $100, which if it's 6.25% annualized, it's $106.25 per year. You could actually have a Chainlink job that would automatically withdraw just the interest and keep the principal in there every month if you wanted to. There's a lot of very neat things like that that can come into play. And I think that the fact that we offer stable interest allows for some very creative things that can get done, because the same stability that people rely upon for the Chainlink Oracle network of constant uptime, trust minimizer, completely permissionless manner of being able to interact with it and its reliability, we can offer a similar reliability when it comes to the interest that's being paid out. So it'll be very interesting to see what kind of things get built together with it. And a couple of examples that Patrick mentioned are just scratching upon the tip of the iceberg.
All right, cool. Well, thank you everybody much. Thank you everybody so much for attending. Corey, this was fantastic. It was great to hear more about how to integrate and how to build some of these things with these M tokens. And this will be going up on YouTube. So if anybody wants to reference something and come back, this will be there. And yeah, Corey, thank you so much for being on.
Thank you. And share that the link with me too when you get the chance, please. We can share it through our community then as well.
Awesome. Absolutely.
All right.
Cool. Signing off.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.